has changed. The forces of social that you're all aware of, the rise of cloud computing, the vast amounts of data, and the rise of mobile computing has changed the landscape for all of us at a business level and at a personal level. And it's brought with it threats as well as opportunities. There are always threats when you have opportunities. Organizations now need to become much more conscious of those threats and the data that is actually feeding them. Now, you know how much technology has changed when you start to realize there are now more mobile phones in the world than there are toothbrushes. I've never worked out what this says about oral hygiene, but it does say a lot about our love affair with technology. And it's well substantiated, as this, when it comes from lots and lots of different sources. But whether we like it or not, we now live, work, and play in a digital world. And it's not just something we do in the business environment, it's something we do in our own environment. But interestingly enough, if you look at the business priorities, what do business people actually care about? These results come from a survey we did last year, but frankly, it could have been a survey done 10 years ago. Business doesn't change. Business leaders still care about profitability, they care about growth, they care about delivering cost. And the interesting thing is this, if you look right down at the bottom, there's that little bit for innovation, which always fascinates me, because when I talk to business leaders, they say, we need lots more innovation, but what they actually need is they want more profit. So there's this compromise going on between what technology can do and what actually organizations are really looking for. At the same time, another one of these fantastic statistics, and as an analyst, I love this one because I immediately start thinking, well, firstly, how does he know that? And secondly, when in 2003 are we talking about? Was this January the 1st, or was this April, or was this December? The answer, of course, is it really doesn't matter. But the reality is we live in a world that is awash with data. And if you think it's slowing down, then you ain't seen nothing yet. Over the next few years, the sort of data we are collecting about individuals will start to include genome data. And the orders of magnitude that will go up in terms of how much more data, how much more information we're collecting, and how much more personally sensitive that information is going to get more and more and more. So, a digital world, lots of information, and the reality is lots of devices as well. One of the questions I often get asked is how many devices are connected to the internet, and the answer to that is we don't know. Although we'll confidently say, well, it's about 16 billion. It's probably going up over the next few years to 30 to 40 to 50 billion, although many of you may have seen estimates from various organizations going all the way up to 1 trillion devices connected online by the end of this decade or so. Now, it's not just the numbers of devices, because all of them are creating information, it's the sheer diversity. I've grown up over the history of the PC era, and I've gotten used to this idea that computers are those things with a screen, a keyboard, and a mouse, and so on. But the reality now is computers don't have those sort of things. You don't need a keyboard. You can wave at computers, and they'll do things for you. You can talk to computers. Computers will now track your eyelid movements and your gaze and do things accordingly. When you have devices like Google Glass, and you always know a device is going to be disruptive when it's banned before it's actually available in many parts of the world, then the idea of what is a device starts to actually get rather interesting. We're on the verge of going not only from wearable devices into embedded devices. Epidermal electronics, the one down at the bottom there, is like a printed tattoo. It actually gets printed onto the skin. It uses the skin's sweat as the electrolyte in a battery, and it has sensors and so on. Many of you will probably be wearing things like fitness bands, another type of device. One of my favorites, a little device that you can put into your plant pots that will tweet you when they're dry, saying, please water me. The reverse of that is actually an experimental device that I came across in Brazil recently, which is a sensor, similar sort of sensor, embedded into babies' nappies that tweets when they're wet. So, you can have both extremes going on here. But basically, everything is being connected, and everything is producing data. And ultimately, we will end up as one of these cyborgs, and we'll all have embedded devices in us, and we'll all be talking to each other without ever saying anything, which, interestingly enough, is exactly what my kids do today. They can sit next to each other, and rather than actually communicate, they'll be texting away quite happily. One of my defining moments almost was one evening when I came in and found my daughter and her boyfriend sitting on the sofa texting each other, and all I thought was, times have changed, because if I was in that situation, I wouldn't have been texting. It's not just people, though. You'll hear a lot these days about the Internet of Things, sensor networks. It comes under different names. I mean, Cisco talks about the Internet of Everything, IBM talks about Smarter Planet, GE talks about the Industrial Internet. But this is really just about billions and billions of devices. I mean, GE embeds sensors into jet engines so it can monitor what's going on in mid-flight. Good business, really. GE doesn't like the idea of an engine failing. I don't like the idea of an engine failing. And the airline doesn't like an idea of an engine failing. So understanding what is going on in real time is actually very valuable. But it's not just, inanimate objects. Cows. One of the interesting things once I started getting more and more into agriculture as I got older is to understand just how much technology there is in cows. Cows these days wear GPS-enabled neckbands. Those actually will tell the farmer where the cow is, what it's doing, and that's actually surprisingly valuable. They produce quite a lot of data every day. And when a cow's not feeling well, it wanders off to a different part of the field and moves rather differently. So the farmer can work out from understanding where it is, how it feels. And you might think, well, okay, that's all very interesting, and they come into the milking parlor, and you get the data coming off them, and they're fed the right amount of food to go with the amount of milk they've produced. What you don't realize is how smart cows are getting. I was talking to someone recently and he said, the biggest problem we have is the system is set up so that when the cow actually moves away having fed to go out, they've now worked out that if they get halfway out of the exit gates, the system has recognized the next cow coming back in, so then they shove themselves back in and have the next cow's lunch as well. I've never quite worked out what happens in the field later, whether there's a sort of settlement goes on. But even animals can get smart when it comes to information and game the system. So, over the next few years, we will see a situation where every product, every service goes digital. And, we started out with toothbrushes, and I will introduce you to the latest one. It's an electric toothbrush I bought not that long ago. It's Bluetooth enabled. I go with all the gadgets. So, when you press the button, the little countdown starts clicking. And it reminds you every 30 seconds to change over to the other side of the mouth, and if you press too hard, it gives you little red flashing lights. And at the end of the day, you get the rewards with the smiley faces. Now, of course, the interesting thing is this doesn't actually go any further than that yet. But this is a pointer to what is likely to happen. Because when you look at devices, every electronic device, every digital device produces data. Now, at the moment, it's staying in this little box. But, if we start thinking about what could happen, I look at the impact of these devices at three levels. So what does it do for me? What does this data do for a business? And ultimately, what could this data do for an entire society or an industry? Now, three levels of impact. Well, first off, we can create the digital toothbrush, so we have a good experience cleaning my teeth. But now we can start to think, well, suppose if this is Bluetooth enabled and I put a home hub in there and I transmit the data from that little display to the home hub, I can aggregate that data. So now I have an opportunity for actually a business to both create the hubs and collect data from the refrigerator and the home automation systems and all these sorts of things. But I can now start to think, well, how do I actually do something else with that? Can I sell that data? Who would want to buy that data? Business opportunity here. Well, clearly, if I go down to my dental healthcare provider, they might say, well, if you can prove you're cleaning your teeth well, maybe I'll get a discount on my dental healthcare plan. So now we're sort of using that data coming from this toothbrush to actually go into the financial services sector to reduce costs. My dentist might be very interested in that. Ultimately, if we start collecting all this data together, the government might be interested because they can start to say, well, the people in that part of the world actually do a very good job, so we don't need so many dentists, but maybe we need a lot more over here because they're not doing such a good job. And now we've got data to actually support that. So, from a simple digital toothbrush, we can actually start to build up a data source that would allow planning at a national level for healthcare. And that's the sort of way you've got to look at these things. Every product has a digital component to it, and those digital components, every one of them creates an opportunity for advancement. But of course, every opportunity comes with a downside, and there is a dark side to data as well. About 240 years ago, Jeremy Bentham, an English social reformist, came up with this idea of the panopticon. And the panopticon was a prism. It was a prison in which the inmates were, you could observe the inmates 24/7, but they never knew when you were being observed. They could not see the people watching them. The principle being, of course, that if you didn't know when you were being watched, you had to actually reform. Well, Jeremy Bentham never actually managed to get a working panopticon in those days. But today, we have pretty much done the job for him. Because everything you do is being observed. We live in a world without secrets. For organizations, they are now coming to realize that the old style default we had of this idea of privacy has gone. It's gone forever. 20 years ago, Scott McNealy at Sun Microsystems came out with the immortal line, "Privacy is dead, just get over it." And he was right then, he's even more right today. We leave behind us a digital trail that says an awful lot about us, however anonymous you might think it is. At government level, we have a vast increase in drones that have quite astonishing capabilities if you only believe half of the things that you actually read. But it's not just at government level. Down at the bottom corner, you've got a Parrot drone. You can buy one for about $240. Now, interestingly enough, I've come across two sort of instances of this. The CIO at Balfour Beatty, the construction company, is now interested in using drones to actually fly along the central reservational motorways to survey for foreign objects and various things. The point being, it's dangerous for people to be walking along the middle of a motorway. If they can do this automatically, great. So you can start to observe things without having to put people in harm's way. The utility companies, I live in the rural part of Wales. The utility companies use helicopters to actually fly along the power cables to see where they're actually potentially down or to spot trees that need to be changed. Even more interestingly, I talked to the CIO of one of the national sort of human rights agencies, and they're starting to use drones of this sort to fly over demonstrations to spot the law enforcement officials who are abusing their rights. At the same time, of course, the law enforcement officials are using drones to fly over those same demonstrations to see what the citizens are doing. And the question really became is, if the law enforcement drones are putting lasers and weapons on theirs, ethically we cannot put weapons on our drones, so how do we protect our drones against their drones? So if you think there's just a revolution going on the ground, there's actually a dogfight going on up in the air as well between technologists. And the point being, these are not multi-million dollar investments. These are actually very low-cost consumer-type drones that you could quite happily be flying over your garden to look over next door's fence to see what they were up to as well.